Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2000 Hack Summit. We're lucky to be here today with Mark Lurie and John Forrest, who are the co-founders of the Codex Protocol. And the Codex Protocol is completely different than everything else we've seen so far at Hack Summit. It is a token that's built on top of the existing infrastructure layers of the blockchain, and it's used to actually power a collectibles marketplace on the blockchain where you can essentially have a collectibles industry with a whole bunch of services and products all built on the blockchain to unite the collectibles industry and to pave the way forward for a future of that whole industry. And so we thought you might enjoy seeing an actual application of the blockchain, of these underlying protocols, and seeing how it can be used to solve real problems for real organizations. So Mark and John, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to talking with everyone.
Awesome. So Mark, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit quickly about maybe a little bit about your background and what you noticed in the world that led to you creating the Codex Protocol. And also feel free to introduce your co-founder as well and his background.
Sure. So my name is Mark Lurie. I'm based in San Francisco at the moment. And I have a venture and technology background. So I did my undergrad and MBA at Harvard. I worked at Bessemer Venture Partners for a while. And then I started a company called Lofty.com, which is an online marketplace for art and collectibles, like a high-end eBay or an online Sotheby's or Christie's. And I ran that for several years and then sold it a year and a half ago and realized from that experience how many problems there are in this asset class and how big of an opportunity there is for blockchain specifically to be able to solve them. And that's what really led to Codex, which I'll tell you about in a moment, but first I'll let John introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm John Forrest and really excited to be here. My background is actually a little bit different in that this is my first foray into the startup world. I worked at a large corporation, specifically Microsoft, for about 6.5 years. And in February, I left the large corporate blanket of Microsoft and jumped into the blockchain space. And it's really interesting. So at Microsoft, I worked on the identity team. And so we focused a lot on like, how do we make authentication really easy? And we're seeing a lot of those same challenges in the blockchain world where people are trying to figure out, how do you map a private key, or how do you authenticate a user without compromising their privacy and security? And there's just a ton of interesting challenges to tackle there in terms of sovereign identity. So, but yeah, I'm from a traditional background and kind of learning, ramping up in the blockchain space for the last couple months, and happy and excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's go into a little bit about the motivation behind the Codex Protocol. So Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about the problem that you saw in the world through your past entrepreneurial efforts and what led to the creation of Codex?
So the problem with really unique assets broadly, and especially in art and collectibles, is that the value of these pieces is critical for doing any sort of business, whether you're making a loan, whether you're buying, whether you're selling, whether you're insuring, whether you're shipping. And but it's hard to determine the value because it's hard to get and verify information about unique assets, especially art and collectibles, where the whole value of a piece is determined by its provenance, which is its history.
And Mark, what is an example of maybe like a collectible, like just so that our audience is on the same page as us?
Sure. So collectibles range from art to wine to jewelry, watches, collectible cars, sports memorabilia, coins, and they range in value from eBay to $100 million paintings that sell at Sotheby's and Christie's. So it really runs the gamut, and a lot of people collect at least something.
Mm-hmm. And so, tell me some of the challenges that are apparent in that industry.
So it's just really hard to know what something's worth. And thus it takes a long time and it's very expensive to do any sort of transacting. So let's say you're buying something at auction. Transaction costs might be 40%. And before an auction consigns a piece, they might have to do weeks of research. And that just makes it really tough to do business. And there's a lot of fakes, a lot of fraud. This research is kind of hard and takes expertise. And the reason that it's so tough is because there's no system of record. There's no title registry like every other asset class, like you have for cars and real estate. where you could just go to get that data. And so you have to reconstruct it every time. And it's because there's no title registry that there's an opportunity to build a title registry. And the reason there's no title registry is because people in this market really like privacy. They don't want to share jewelry and watches, wine with the government or anything. And so there's never been a title registry. But with blockchain, we can track the ownership and identity of items, preserving privacy of the owners. And that makes it possible to have a title registry. It makes it possible to make everything easier in art and collectibles. You don't have to re-verify information, re-research information every time you want to do it.
That makes sense. And Mark, I'm going to go ahead and switch you to audio only just for a second to see if that helps improve the bandwidth of the audio that we're hearing from you. You can feel free to continue to converse with us. Hopefully that'll cut down on the bandwidth requirements on your end a little bit. Okay, so let's continue the conversation here. Let's see if this improves it, Mark. So why don't you continue to tell us a little bit of that vision about how you're solving for that problem right now in the art and collectibles industry?
Sure. So Codex is a decentralized registry for unique assets, like a title registry. And as I mentioned, we're initially focused on art collectibles, fine art, wine, jewelry, watches, collectible cards, sports, etc. And so what we're doing is we're creating an identity in the form of a non-fungible token for each item on the blockchain, which stores the provenance of the item, which includes its history of ownership and metadata about it, so that it's easily verifiable and accessible, but preserves the privacy of the owner. And we're backed by an industry consortium that ensures that this registry is going to be used for about 10 million items a year, worth about $6 billion, sold by 5,000 auction houses. And once we have all this data, applications are being built on top of it. There's a lending application. There's an insurance application. There's an application that ties physical items to digital records. And a lot more. There's a company that fractionalizes and tokenizes these items. And we're focused on building the first application, Biddable, which makes it possible to bid and buy it with crypto. And that's already integrated into probably 10, 15 auction houses in our beta. So you can today go on and you can bid and buy with crypto on everything, roll that to Picassos at these auctions.
Great, I think we got most of that, Mark. Maybe I'll let John kind of continue with the explanation, just since his audio seems to be a little bit better here. So John, kind of riffing on what Mark was just saying there, tell me about the architecture of what you've actually created. So what is the system that you guys have created, and what's your vision for the future of this on the blockchain?
Yeah, so I think, taking a step back and just talking about general dApp architecture in general, I think there's a lot of different approaches. If you look at dApps like Augur, for example, which just launched earlier this week, and I think a lot of people have been pretty excited about that because it's been 3 years in the making. They've gone the approach of fully decentralizing everything. In order to use the application, you have to install software locally. It talks directly to the blockchain through a local server that you've deployed in their local client application. Then you have other applications like CryptoKitties, which I think Benny was on earlier talking, where they actually centralize some parts of it. The API and the front end is through their website or their servers. And then the decentralized part of it is the smart contracts or the actual kitties. So if the CryptoKitties servers were to ever go down, you would still own this token, but it's, in my opinion, much less valuable if you can't render it on their front end. And so we've kind of taken the approach of the CryptoKitties model, where we've centralized some parts of the service or the application, and there's a reason for that. And I think CryptoKitties realized this early on. If you go the route of decentralizing everything, you're at the cost of user experience, you're decentralizing more of these things. So CryptoKitties went the other route, and to make things easier for the user, they centralize core aspects of it, like the front end and the back end, and they have a ton of users because of it. They were the first dApp to kind of explode last year in 2017. they kind of went viral. They were the first exposure that a lot of users that had no idea what the blockchain was. It's kind of their first foray into the technology. And I don't think they would have ever been in the place they are today if they had gone the full decentralized route. It would just be too hard to use from a user's perspective. And so at Codex, we've kind of taken the same approach where we've centralized certain parts of it. We still think the ownership part of it is important to decentralize. And over time, we'll be building an ecosystem such that more and more parts of the service can be decentralized. But in order to get users early on, we need to centralize some of these things such that it's easy to use.
In fact, that's actually a design pattern that I've seen in other projects as well, is this idea of starting off a project as centralized, where governance is even centralized of the project, because you haven't built the community yet. It's still a nascent project, and you're shouldering the responsibility of governance initially yourself. But then over time, as the community becomes more vibrant, you can start to offload some of that responsibility onto the ecosystem. So it sounds like you're following that path as well.
Yeah, and I'd mentioned Augur before, and they've kind of even taken this approach where they have this notion that when their dApp is launched or when their smart contracts have launched, they, as the developers or as the admin, they have the ability to make changes to the smart contracts. But over time, there's functionality within the smart contracts such that they can turn off the upgradability. So over time, they'll turn off all of these upgradabilities, and the ecosystem and the smart contracts will just live on, and they can essentially step away from the role of governance or admin. So I like this idea, and Dietz from the CryptoKitties team actually mentioned this in a talk. He wishes they would have had done something similar. So right now, CryptoKitties, the admin account, you can pause the entire contract, and he wishes they would have had the ability to take that away at some point so it can live on without the users being afraid that it'll ever get turned off.
Mm-hmm. And John, why do you think that there was not a system of record in this industry already? Like, this industry's been around for a while, right? There's been auctions, auction houses, collectibles. When I was a kid, I guess antique coins were kind of a thing. And I'm 41 years old, right? So this is most of my life that I've seen this. What do you think has caused this to not work in the past? And how can you guys solve for that today?
Well, I think this is actually a really great question for Mark to answer. So, Mark, I'm going to pass this on to you. One? If your connection's still bad, I'll chip in.
Great. That's the core of why blockchain's critical. In the past, this is a market where everyone would like a title registry and a system of record, but no one's willing to compromise privacy. Individuals don't want to give up their personal information to a central authority, and intermediaries like auction houses or galleries don't want to give up client lists to a central authority. And so none has existed. But blockchain lets us build applications that keep the owners private while preserving the identity of the items themselves as they transfer across owners over time. And so the question is, this blockchain aspect of it is a critical piece of making this acceptable to the market and solving a lot of problems. But it comes with a lot of challenges, right? It's part of the development cycle for distributed applications, decentralized applications. The UX has to operate within the speed and other constraints of blockchain. And you have to build the application for traditional users who aren't sophisticated in crypto and blockchain, even though most of the infrastructure built for people who are sophisticated and have benefits. And so those are a lot of the development challenges that we've had to deal with and get smart around in order to actually bring this really very obvious solution to.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. I think we caught about every other word there, so I think we got the gist of it. But it was still a little bit broken. Right. So maybe going forward, we'll have John try to take the brunt of the interview.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless Mark's connection improves. But that was very helpful, Mark. So thank you for that. Great. Okay, so this makes a lot of sense. So going forward, tell me, John, about the major subsystems that you're building. So what is the platform here for the art and collectibles industry, and how does it all going to work?
Sure. So there's a couple different pieces to our application, and I as a developer from the traditional software industry, I tend to just use app for everything. I know some people are really sold on using the word dApp, but really everything's an app. And so for decentralized apps, or for our app specifically, we have a couple different components. One is the smart contracts, which is the core of every decentralized application. And this is the logic that lives on-chain. For the Ethereum blockchain, you'll be writing in Solidity, or there's a couple new programming languages that are being developed right now. And this is the core decentralized application, or decentralized component of any dApp. And then as for any traditional web app, you have your front end, which would be written in something like Vue or React or any JavaScript framework, and your back end. So this is a pattern that's kind of emerged, and I think again, CryptoKitties was kind of the first to pilot this pattern of having this API or this backend layer that actually is listening to the smart contracts. They index all these events that are relevant to CryptoKitties specifically. And then the front end talks to that back end as opposed to talking directly to the blockchain. And there's a lot of advantages of doing this, but the biggest one is just the performance of talking directly to an API as opposed to talking to the blockchain. You don't have to query 10,000 blocks back, or the data that is relevant to your application is available in the API, and you're not dealing with other people's data as well. So we've kind of followed, I would call this the standard dApp pattern of indexing events that are relevant to our platform, our smart contracts, our registry, and building out an API to surface those to the front end. So that's kind of like the three key components, I would say, that compose Codex Protocol, or Codex Viewer, which is our first dApp that we're kind of exposing the protocol information to end users. Okay, very helpful. And are there political forces at work within this industry that are tough to overcome in terms of adoption of a technology like this? I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of kind of stalwart folks who don't know what a blockchain is and who maybe aren't that technologically savvy. Is it tough to convince them to think about using something like this? Yeah, so I think the term political forces is a little strong. I would say there's definitely usability challenges. So I think there's two parts to that question. The first is the notion of this political force, where in the arts and collectibles space, there's a lot of intermediaries that exist today that are essentially middlemen, but they also provide a lot of additional things other than taking a portion of the transaction. So a lot of people are very, very harsh on auction houses, for example, because they take a large percentage of fees when they're selling items. But people don't realize that the auction houses themselves do a lot of work to authenticate these items. So like Sotheby's and Christie's, they go through a long process of verifying authenticity of the $10 million painting that's being sold. And because they have this great reputation, they're able to bring this huge amount of market, the people that are willing to buy those types of paintings or pieces of art. So if you were to try and sell a $10 million painting on your own, you don't have the same reputation and the same clout as Sotheby's would, so it's likely wouldn't sell for the same price. So as opposed to a traditional startup, which is typically trying to disrupt and displace all these intermediaries, we're actually working with a lot of these intermediaries because adoption of a protocol or this mechanism is key to the success of our protocol, key to the success of our company. Mm-hmm. We have to work with these players such that they can streamline their own authentication of the pieces and have provenance on the blockchain. So we can't displace them. So that's, I would say, like, in terms of political forces, we're actually working with those intermediaries such that we have adoption. And if you kind of think about this at the high level, right, you're essentially building a distributed database, a system of record, so to speak, for the transaction history of a collectible within that industry. Is it hard to get everyone to agree to use one system of record for that, given that historically they have their own private databases and they may be accustomed to that? Yeah, so I think this comes back to the second part of your question is, one, how do we get everyone to work together? And also, two, how do we get companies that are, the art space is traditionally more conservative at adopting new technology? How do we get them to use something like blockchain, which is arguably on the bleeding edge of technology? And so this is some of the challenges that Mark referenced earlier that we're kind of working through is how do we solve for users that don't want to install MetaMask, that are used to logging into Facebook with just their username or password. I'd actually written a blog post a couple of months back that, again, I'm going to pick on CryptoKitties because I think they're such a great example to work with, but they're kind of the gold standard for a dApp, right? But if you think about it from an end user, if you were to have your grandma log into CryptoKitties, like what's that process look like? So, just breaking it down, she has to install MetaMask. She has to go fund her MetaMask account, which often involves going to Coinbase and buying Ether. And what does that mean? That means you have to go through KYC AML. So after you go through maybe this week-long process of getting set up and funding your Ether account, now you can play CryptoKitties, but like compare that to Facebook, for example, where you type in like two form fields and then you're up and running in like 5 minutes. So dApps have a long way to go, and certainly like we're examining these problems with a fine lens. It's like, how do we abstract some of those complexities away such that we can get people like our grandparents who are typically going to be closer to the art community. They may have collections of their own. So we have to appeal to that audience, I think, in order to succeed as a business in the arts and collectibles industry.
I'm glad you said that. And audience, I just kind of want to make a comment here, which is that at the high level, I think what these guys are doing is awesome, because if you think about us as engineers and as developers, whenever there's a new shiny technology, the first instinct that we have is to basically build stuff that solves our own problems, because that's what developers do. We try to build APIs and technologies for other developers because that's solving problems that we have personally in our lives. What this team is doing is they're trying to be empathetic for an entire other industry and solving problems for them. And the technology is just a means to an end to solve that problem. It's not necessarily technology being built for technology's sake. And in my experience, and I've seen a lot over the last 20 years, when you're solving a very specific industry's specific pain point, and it's a vertical specific problem, that tends to have a fairly high chance of success, because you're solving a very narrow problem within that industry, and those customers tend to be appreciative of that solution. So that's why I think this is very interesting what you guys are doing here. So let's jump to the audience and go through a few questions here. So the first question is, how do you plan on dealing with both the problem of user data input in both establishing the authenticity of a collectible item and establishing its existence on the blockchain? Did that question make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm also.
Can you hear me, by the way, or am I still lagging and
Actually,
cutting it out?
You sound kind of okay. So why don't you give it a shot, and we'll let you know how it goes.
Okay, great. Cut me off if I'm cutting out. So in many ways, what we're doing parallels the real world, because today, when you want to know if something's real, you look at who's sold it in the past, who's validated it. Is it an appraiser? Is it an artist? Is it someone you trust? Is it an auction house that's well known? And what we're doing on the blockchain is similar. We're letting these validators certify their opinions about pieces, but do it on the blockchain so you know it actually came from them. And that's why it's so important to do partnerships with people like auction houses, because that's where a lot of the volume comes from. And so whenever something's sold at auction, it's a great time for it to get loaded onto the blockchain, and for the work of the experts at those places to be certified and stamped immutably on the blockchain, so that that validation kind of persists over time.
Very helpful. Thank you, Mark. And you sounded good, by the way. Why don't we have you grab another one, which is who is the target audience? Who really needs to buy and sell these unique assets? Who buys? Is it an older generation of folks or a younger generation that's using this? What's your view on that?
So I think there's a set of commercial and business users who serve this industry, and then there's end users who collect items and trade items. They do skew a bit older, but not as old as you'd think. Lots of people trade collectible cars. Lots of people trade and collect wine. Lots of people trade and collect sports memorabilia and Beanie Babies and watches. The growth of eBay in the early 90s was almost completely driven, and e-commerce and PayPal was almost completely driven by collectibles. And so it's really a wide gamut, but I think that it's not necessarily people who are technologists first. And that's why, for us, blockchain is such a perfect solution, but usability is the challenge. And that's what we really innovate around, to make sure that people who, of all ages, who actually have a need and a use case, don't need to learn to use blockchain.
Great, thank you, Mark. We caught almost that whole thing. We cut out at the very end. Maybe we'll let John grab one here. So John, there's a couple technical questions here for you.
Sure.
Which parts of your system are centralized and which are decentralized?
So for that question, we followed closely the architecture of CryptoKitties, in that the decentralized part right now is the token you own on the blockchain. So we don't actually store the metadata itself on the Ethereum blockchain, just because of, for two reasons really. One, there's a large financial cost of storing, images and raw data on the blockchain. Storage is a premium. And two, as Mark mentioned before, collector privacy is the utmost importance to us. So if you're storing a user's raw collection on the blockchain, all of a sudden auction houses can target this particular user because they know he owns 20 pieces that are worth $100 million. So next time he comes to auction, they're going to ratchet the price up a little bit. So right now we have a centralized way of storing that information. But that being said, on our product roadmap, we've taken the approach of building out decentralized solutions over time. So over time, we want to be able to allow users or other data providers, we're calling them, to be able to host metadata on their services. We don't want to be the only player in the space. So I kind of relate it to the 0x model, where they've built out this ecosystem of relayers, where for those of you that aren't aware, the 0x protocol is a decentralized exchange protocol, and they work with what they're called relayers to share liquidity across the network. But they don't actually, the 0x team themselves, they don't actually have a relayer of their own. And so I think this is an interesting model where you engage the broader development community to kind of build on top of your protocol. And so we're working towards a solution in that nature.
That's great. Thank you for that. And then last question here. Oh, go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I think I'm reading the comments, and this is also something we get a lot, are you truly decentralized if you're not decentralizing everything? And I think that's a really interesting philosophical question as you design these apps, because the more you decentralize, it comes at a cost, stability. And so as you design blockchain applications, the key question is, why are you decentralizing? What is it you need to decentralize? And decentralize that. And then the rest, do what's pragmatic. And so for us, it's the privacy of the, and that can be accomplished with having kind of a federation of different stores of data. It doesn't have to be completely decentralized in order to accomplish that specific goal, because that's the thing that's held this solution back in the past.
That's very well. It's a very practical perspective there. Very nice. So Mark and John, if our audience wants to get involved or learn more, what are next steps for them? How can they get involved in this initiative or learn more about the initiative?
So you can visit codexprotocol.com and sign up and read everything about us. You can join our Telegram at Codex Protocol. You can always contact me at mark@codexprotocol.com. We'd love for you to engage as much as possible. And John will tell you about our GitHub, because we're a source, which you can also get involved in.
Yeah, feel free to check out the GitHub. It is github.com/codex-protocol. We do have a bug bounty going on right now. So we're in the process of running our beta on the Rinkeby test network. So feel free to stop by, and if you find any issues in the smart contracts, we'll reward you in ETH. We just finished our security audit with the group called Hosho. And yeah, feel free to tweet me, email me directly at john@codexprotocol.com, and happy to address any developer questions.
That's awesome. It's great having you guys here. I mean, super refreshing to see a team that's not just a solution looking for a problem. but is actually solving a very specific, deep industry pain point. And blockchain as an actual solution for that. I think we're going to start seeing more and more examples of this as the years go on and as blockchain evolves. And you guys are leading the way. So thanks for that.
Appreciate you for having us.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. We'll be right back with our next speaker. And Mark and John, thanks again for taking a stand for coding nonprofits. If you enjoyed learning about the Codex Protocol today, please visit codexprotocol.com and click the donate button on the bottom of your screen to make a donation to a nonprofit of your choice. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Thanks, guys. We'll be right back.
Talk to you later.